All right, I'd like to go ahead and call the February 28th, 2022 regular meeting of the Shoreline City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Scully.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Robertson.
Here.
Councilmember Ramsdale.
Present.
Councilmember Mork.
Present.
Councilmember McConnell.
Here.
Councilmember Povey.
Present.
And Councilmember Roberts.
Here.
Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Are there any requested changes to the agenda? Councilmember McConnell, did you have a requested change?
Sorry, I'm spacing. Yes, I would like to pull item 7D off the consent agenda, and with your pleasure, I hope it could be 8A.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Councilmember McConnell, for notifying us in advance that she had intended to do that. So item 7D, which is authorize the city manager to execute a construction contract with Rodarte Construction, will now become item 8A, and 8A will now become 8B. Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor Scully. I move to postpone new agenda item 8A to a future meeting at the discretion of the mayor and city manager.
All right. That motion requires a second. Is there a second to that motion?
Second the motion.
Oh. All right. Motion and a second. Councilmember Roberts, would you like to address your motion?
Sure. I mean, since this is being pulled, I think there should be, I believe that we should, as a council, should have the time, and the staff should have the time to prepare to discuss the item. And I don't know if there's time on the agenda today to do so.
I apologize. Any other comments on the motion?
Yes, Mayor Scully. Yeah, I concur with Councilmember Roberts. I would like to delay discussing item 8A until future council meeting.
Any other comments or questions?
Do-
Ms. Go ahead, Councilmember McConnell.
Oh, sorry, I was quicker to raise my hand physically. Don't we have to suggest a time to delay it to, or is that not, in your motion, council member?
I don't believe the rules require an item
Okay.
to be moved from an agenda. The motion was that it be reset at the city manager in my discretion, which I believe is procedurally proper. Any other comments? Ms. Terry, could the staff just provide input on whether moving that agenda item will affect any construction schedules or other city plans?
I don't know if Tricia is on. I guess my what I don't know is how long the bids are good for. So whether there's any impact there. Obviously, delay is going to impact schedule, but my bigger question would just be on the actual bids themselves. So it looks like Randy is coming on. So
Right. Yeah. Mr. Witt, my inclination would be to schedule this, if it's possible, a week later, if the motion passes. So Mr. Witt, if you can provide information on whether that would adversely impact operations in any way, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I think the city manager summed it up. A week delay won't critically impact. We do have, I believe Trish will be here if she's not here already to speak to some of the questions, but the week can be worked in. I don't believe it, to the city manager's point, it doesn't run past the award time for the contract date. We wouldn't run past that. That's 45 days.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other comments or argument on the motion? Will the clerk please conduct a vote?
Mayor Scully.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Robertson.
Aye.
Councilmember Ramsdale.
Aye.
Councilmember Mork.
Aye.
Councilmember McConnell.
Nay.
Councilmember Povey.
Aye.
Councilmember Roberts.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes. So the current item 8A is moved off calendar. We'll reschedule it as soon as possible. Action item, what used to be 8B is now 8A. Are there any other changes to the proposed agenda? Seeing none, the amended agenda is adopted. And next up is report of the city manager.
Thank you, Council. Let's see. As you can see from the graph, and as you probably have heard on the news, the transmission rates of COVID-19 continue to move downward. In fact, today we finally broke below the high transmission rate into the substantial. And so that is good news. We still need to be cautious given that we are still even in a substantial transmission rate. But as you probably have been hearing, there's some significant changes that are coming. First of all, effective March 1st, King County will end its vaccine verification requirements for businesses such as restaurants, theaters, and gyms. This includes the Spartan Recreation Center. Also, as of today, the governor has indicated that the state indoor mask mandate will end on March 12th. We've also heard indications from public health in King County that the indoor mask mandate in King County will also end on this date. People should be aware that businesses may continue to implement their own vaccine verification and masking rules or guidelines for their businesses. And we would ask that people comply with that when that is done. So just a reminder, this is a recapturing of what we understand will happen is that there are still some areas where face coverings are required. And that is in the healthcare facilities, long-term care settings, public transportation, and rideshare vehicles that is mandated by federal requirement, correctional facilities, and then private businesses and local governments that want to require masks for their employees, customers, or residents. And then not required anymore, effective March 12th, would be all of these businesses and organizations listed there on the right, and unless it is noticed otherwise. So trying to just keep everybody informed. And I think that as this happens, that again, we would just strongly encourage people to get vaccinated and boosted because there is still transmission happening, and that is the best way to help continue to move our trends downward. We also would encourage people to continue to wearing their face coverings in indoor public places until the mask mandate is lifted. Again, please get tested if you feel like you have symptoms and stay home. It's a fun opportunity as we update the city's climate action plan. We're kicking off a series of community climate conversations, and we would love the feedback of the public and ideas in these conversations that will help identify climate action strategies that also improve equity, increase community resilience, and protect ecosystems in Shoreline. Please join us on March 2nd from 6 to 8 p.m. to discuss ways the city can support low carbon ways of getting around, like walking or biking, public transit, electric vehicles, micromobility, and more. Decarbonizing transportation is key to reaching our goals and of reducing emissions 60% by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. You can learn more and join the conversation at shorelinewa.gov/climate. And just a reminder that the City Council will hold Planning Commission candidate finalist interviews on March 1st at 6 p.m. This will be done remotely via Zoom. The Planning Commission meeting that was scheduled for this Thursday, March 3rd, has been canceled. This City Council will hold their annual strategic planning workshop this Friday, March 4th from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and on Saturday from March 5th from 8 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. It will be at the Lodge at St. Edward Park. Members of the public may attend the meeting in person if they so choose, or they may also access the meeting via Zoom virtually. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Next on the agenda are council reports. Are there any council reports this evening? Deputy Mayor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor. I will briefly update everyone. I attended the Regional Transit Committee on February 16th. The main update, return to full transit service had originally been scheduled for March 1st, but was delayed as a result of kind of COVID and Omicron impacts. So now that things are changing, hopefully that we'll be back up and running at full speed soon. We continue to work through the draft regional transportation plan, but just something to look forward to and be aware of is that they are reworking the ORCA card program, and want to emphasize that you do not need a new card if you are an ORCA user, but there will be some increased functionality, efficiencies, and will be very customer facing. So look for updates on that in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other council reports? All right, I attended the Lake Ballinger Forum, which is a group of the communities that are in the Lake Ballinger watershed. It was an exciting forum, particularly because Shoreline City staff has identified an opportunity to pursue Corps of Engineers funding to improve some habitat in the adjacent watershed, which is on the shoreline side. And we got the forum's support for that. It's a possible grant of $250,000 that would go into our existing stormwater infrastructure improvements and improve habitat right next to the Burgers Bog Park. Exciting opportunity, and with the forum's support, hopefully we'll be able to get that grant money. Also attended the Echo Lake Neighborhood Association along with the city manager. They were interested in how the city had responded to the COVID crisis and the financial impacts. It's always fun to get out and see just how informed and engaged Shoreline citizens are. The next item on the agenda is public comments. We have 21 people signed up for public comment tonight, which even at 2 minutes would exceed our allotment. Is there a motion related to the time folks can speak? Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to allow all 21 people who have signed up to speak for up to 2 minutes.
Is there a second? Second. Motion and a second. Will the clerk please conduct a vote?
Deputy Mayor Robertson.
Aye.
Mayor Scully.
Aye.
Councilmember McConnell.
Aye.
Councilmember Povey.
Aye.
Councilmember Roberts.
Aye.
Councilmember Mork.
Aye.
And Councilmember Ramsdale.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously. The public comment period is an opportunity for citizens to address the council on any agenda item or any item of concern, with the exception of the quasi-judicial item, which we will not be accepting any additional public comment on. The public comment is limited to 2 minutes, given the number of people present, and we ask that anyone speaking identify themselves by name and city of residence. Ms. Similchek-Smith, will you please conduct the public comment period?
Our first speaker this evening is Jackie Curley.
Yes, hi, good evening. Jackie Curley, longtime Shoreline resident. Just wanted to represent again on behalf of updates and transparency relative to the enhanced shelter, which again, seems like it's going well by all available accounts. I appreciated the mention in the recent currents, and any future mentions and updates would be certainly welcome and appreciated as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, so our next speaker is Ophelia Dale Bernal. And I am scrolling through the list. Ophelia, if you're here, would you be able to raise your hand, please? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next person, who is Melody Fosmore.
Ms. Fosmore, whenever you're ready. It looks like Ms. Curley is still in the room, and I don't see Ms. Fosmore yet.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Let me try
No
this
worries.
again.
Okay. Can you hear me?
We can. Please proceed when ready.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Melody Fosmore, almost a 40-year resident of Shoreline. The TPCT of Shoreline citizens has worked for the last 2 years on code changes to protect and preserve our tall trees. For 2 years, we attended city council meetings, wrote hundreds of letters and emails, and presented the proposed codes to the appropriate people at the appropriate time. I'm pointing this out to you now as it's important to review the amount of sustained effort it has taken to get to today. We are passionate about our tall native trees and the benefits they bring to all of us. The code changes before you are not egregious. They are meant to save and protect trees. We are not a special interest group, as the science before us with climate change points directly as trees being one of our best defenses against heat that can kill us, not to mention the carbon intake and CO2 that keeps us alive. In today's news, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres states, quote, "I have seen many scientific reports in my time, but nothing like this. Today's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report is an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership," unquote. We know we can't reverse the world's climate change failures, but we can make changes locally. Since 2019, over 900 trees have been removed for development, not to mention private trees. We love our city, and as taxpayers, our voice should be more important than the developers. We live here. We live every day with the consequences of decisions made by the permitting process. We live in hotter neighborhoods with less birdsong and more sounds from the street traffic. We live with hotter sidewalks in a landscape that has more holes than ever where the tall, beautiful trees used to stand. Meanwhile, sidewalk trees, which are public trees and belong to us, are being removed for even wider sidewalks. We want and vote for sidewalks. If you want people to use the sidewalks, then please keep the trees. We can walk around the trees and slow down, let someone else pass. We can make way for wheelchairs and strollers. Please take a stand today and keep the Fifth Avenue trees with a narrow sidewalk on one area so people can walk in comfort and beauty. Thank you for your service and time.
Thank you, Ms. Fosmore.
So I just noticed that Ms. Day Bernal is on the phone, so I am going to allow her to talk right now. Ms. Day Bernal, you can push *6 to unmute yourself.
Ms. David, we unfortunately can't unmute you on the phone. You have to push *6 and then we'll be able to hear you.
Would you like me to move on down the list again? Okay.
Please, and if you can contact her while someone else is speaking and see if we can work it out, that'd be great.
I will do that. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker is Wally Fosmore.
Mr. Fosmore, whenever you're ready.
Yes, my name is Wally Fosmore, longtime resident of Shoreline, and I'm speaking in regard to Amendment 5, 2050-300 general requirements. It is stated in the comprehensive plan element 6 that trees on development sites are, in quote, at the greatest risk of being lost. There is an item in this proposed code that has not been included in the staff presentation. This is item L, which includes penalties for harm to trees on R8 through R48, MUR 35, MUR 45, and TC-4 development sites. These penalties already in Shoreline Critical Area Code are for serious injury to trees or destruction of trees. The penalties include $3,000 per non-significant tree, $9,000 per significant tree, $15,000 per a landmark tree. My question is, why is item L, penalties, as appearing in the January 6th presentation to the Planning Commission, agenda item 6A, attachment C, page 12, not included for review by the council? Also, it was not presented to the Planning Commission for final decision. This appears to be a staff decision. Stop work orders are recommended, but if a tree is damaged beyond remedy, then there is no effective consequence. We understand that item M, financial guarantees, has been removed, but it was not communicated to us that item L would be removed from consideration by the council. These penalties are important and necessary to the proposed code. We ask council to review the above penalties as part of Amendment 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fosmore.
Next up is Bill Turner.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead when you're ready.
My name is Bill Turner. I'm a Shoreline resident, last 25 years. The following is my statement in support of changing SMC 2020-048T definitions pertaining to TPCT's original proposal of tree landmark. Any viable significant tree over 24 inches in diameter at breast height, a permit is required for removal. This proposal is supported by these short summaries of 3 science-based articles. A written description of the studies was submitted to City Council last week. The first is entitled "Large Trees Dominate Carbon Storage in Forests East of the Cascade Crest in the U.S. Pacific Northwest." This study shows how trees larger than 21 inches DBH work to mitigate climate change by sequestering more carbon, and concludes that large trees, if allowed to grow larger, will result in greater amounts of stored carbon. The second study explored the relationships between above ground carbon stocks and land cover within an urbanized area, entitled "Terrestrial Carbon Stocks Across the Gradient of Urbanization," a study of the Seattle, Washington region. It showed that despite denser urbanization, having trees and cover vegetation increases carbon storage. The third study, assessing urban effects and values, is analysis of San Francisco's tree canopy by using a U.S. Forest Service model. It concluded that the largest long-living trees provided the greatest structural and functional values. It also stated that an urban forest's typical species diversity can minimize destruction by a species-specific insect or disease. This diversity would be enhanced in Shoreline by putting into protection more trees 24 inches DBH or greater, in particular benefiting our conifers, Pacific madrone, and big leaf maples. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Okay, next up is Jake McKinnon.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for having me. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, please go ahead when ready.
Great. I'm Jake McKinnon. I'm a resident of the City of Seattle. I'm a principal of Spectrum Development Solutions. We're a local developer as well as owner's representative. We've been very active in Shoreline since 2013, working with Shoreline Community College. We've overseen a number of initiatives, including their new student housing project in 2019, the new health science building, as well as other campus facilities. More recently, we've turned our attention to the 145th Light Rail Station area. We are very focused on high quality transit oriented housing for our missing middle, people making between $40,000 to $100,000 a year, our essential workforce. And in the City of Seattle, all of our projects in multifamily are developed by overhead 3-phase power. So I'm speaking tonight in support of your efforts to amend SMC section 13.20.050C to allow for interim overhead 3-phase power to serve both the new light rail station as well as the new multifamily projects that are coming to the area. Now, this is really essential, and the timing for it is critical because we are planning on delivering our projects in 2024 and 2025. Right now, we currently have over 500 units of housing planned directly adjacent to the 145th Light Rail Station. Over 100 of these units will be set aside for families that are earning between 70 and 80% of AMI for 99 years. So we are firmly committed to providing workforce housing for the community. It's very important to us. And right now with our schedule and timing, it's essential that we deliver in 2024 along with the light rail so that our residents can have equality and access to transportation to get to their jobs and employment centers and education. So thank you for your efforts on this. We really appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. I believe Nancy Morris is next, and it looks like she's already teed up. Ms. Morris, whenever you're ready.
Yes, Nancy Morris, resident of Shoreline. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead whenever
Yes,
you're ready.
Okay, I'm speaking about Fifth Avenue Northeast. Citizens and residents of Fifth Avenue Northeast have followed what city management told us to do. Talk to the project manager, look at the website, take the survey. We have done all this since August 2020, when Save Shoreline Trees first reached out to city management, to no avail. Once again, decisions have been made without citizen input. In 2019, this neighborhood lost hundreds of protected barrier trees for the light rail station, and now 17 healthy trees will be cut down along Fifth Avenue Northeast. We have been told the sidewalk construction is on a timeline to be completed. Yet it is stated in the Fifth Avenue sidewalk video on the webpage that this sidewalk, co-funded by the bond issue and Sound Transit, has to be completed by 2024. It is also stated that the construction will take 6 to 8 months. There is still time for the sidewalk to be redesigned and the trees can be saved. The climate crisis does not have a timeline. It is here now, and decisions about maintaining trees are paramount. Questions were asked in February 2021 at the webinar, and the city response was, quote, early on, we will definitely evaluate and something we can look at, unquote, regarding parking and lighting. Same city response about trees, quote, some tree removals, we will avoid all we can, unquote. And yet it was stated that the sidewalk will wrap around the back of the power poles to, quote, avoid impact, unquote. Why not do this for the trees? We ask you to change the design for Fifth Avenue Northeast, construct a trail bike path along the west side and save the trees at risk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Keen Angie.
Hi, my name is Keen Angie. My wife and I are residents and voters in Shoreline, Washington. I'm here to support our friends from Save Shoreline Trees and the Tree Preservation Code team. Many emails had been sent to Shoreline City Council on the proposed Tree Preservation and Protection Code amendments and the Fifth Avenue sidewalk. I just wanted to put in my 5 cents worth of thoughts. 10 years ago, people thought that you could either choose environment or choose growth. 5 years ago, people realized that it's possible to both protect the environment and grow the economy. Today, people realize that growth is possible only with environmental protection. I challenge you to recognize that we can have housing along our new link rail corridor possible only with keeping our limited mature trees. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to voice my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angie.
Barbara Johnstone is next.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Johnstone, Shoreline resident, and I'm speaking about the Fifth Avenue Northeast Sidewalk Project. In the city video on March 2nd, 2021, the project manager states that this sidewalk is partially funded by the 2018 bond and partially by Sound Transit. In the video, the timeline was reviewed with construction to start in spring 2022, but subject to change. It was also stated that the sidewalk per Sound Transit guidelines has to be completed by 2024 when the light rail station will open. As stated, construction, quote, could be in 2023, end quote. Therefore, it seems there's still time for council to review more. Secondly, in the budget review included in council's February 7th, 2022 agenda packet, the Fifth Avenue Northeast construction cost is $1,531,456. And yet the contract on tonight's consent calendar for road art construction on Fifth Avenue Northeast from Northeast 175th to Northeast 182nd Court is $3,291,215. Citizens have questions about the $1.75 million difference. We asked the council to remove the contract for road art construction until the design for Fifth Avenue Northeast can be reviewed with citizen input. The last presentation to citizens was the video on 2/28/21, a year ago, when the design was at 30%. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnstone.
The next person signed up on the list is Chris Kelly. However, I do not see him in the list of attendees. Chris, if you're one of our telephone callers, would you raise your hand? Oh, here we go. I think we have found. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Hello, my name is Chris Kelly. I'm sitting here with my colleague, Rosalie Marks. I am the Director of Construction for AAA Management, and I'm addressing the council tonight in support of option 2 for the overhead three-phase construction power for MXU21-2058. We are a developer based out of San Diego that has been working in the Shoreline area for a number of years at this time. We have previously completed the GEO project on Midvale Avenue and are currently in construction on the second phase GEO project directly across the street on Midvale and 180th. Our project next to the light rail station on 145th is in a critical point in time. We need overhead construction power in order to begin construction and stay on time for this project to complete and be able to provide Shoreline with new tax-paying residents. This multi-family building is 252 units, 52 of which are affordable. This is a high-quality building that we'll bring to the Shoreline market, and it is a LEED Platinum certified structure. It is imperative that the council moves to approve option 2 for overhead construction power, and we can begin construction of this beautiful building. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Martha Diesner is next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello there, I'm Martha Diesner, City of Shoreline. I live in the Echo Lake condos behind the development project on 198th and Aurora. We have tried to save these trees, 7 mature, Madrona and Douglas fir, and we hope that the city who actually co-owns the property could convince the partners to save more. But this will not happen. Now there's only going to be 1 tree. Everything seems to have to be done by code. I mean, obviously, but this segues into the proposed tree code amendments that were really put a lot of time into this year, the last couple of years, and has been spoken of tonight. We want 6-inch significant tree definition and 24-inch landmark tree definition means more trees will mature and store carbon. Penalties for destruction of a protected tree at a development site will create incentives to developers to save more trees, remove the director authority to waive or reduce tree retention and tree replacement on development sites, and ensure that tree removal on large properties are also subject to tree codes. I'd like also to talk about the Fifth Ave Northeast new sidewalk plan and removal of the 17 non-hazardous significant trees. We need these trees for all the reasons mentioned in the many emails to council. The project manager and city manager have stated that there will be the opportunity to review tree attention again, but this sidewalk plan, which includes walls, sidewalks, bike lanes, and buffers, needs to be redesigned now, before the construction contract is approved, not when it is outlined in the field. That will be too late. I ask that the council direct the sidewalk planning team to prepare alternative plans that will save trees. Thank you so much.
Next.
Thank you, Ms. Go ahead.
Next is Jean Hild.
Hello, good evening, City Council, Ms. Terry, and city staff. My name is Jean Hildy. I live in Shoreline in the Briarcrest neighborhood. While I am a member of the PRCS Tree Board, my testimony tonight is not as a board representative, but in my individual capacity as a resident. I'm also a member of the Citizen Tree Advisory Group, which has submitted a recommendation document to the council. I support the Citizen Tree Preservation Code team's proposed amendments across the board. Council should be hesitant about giving the director the authority to waive or reduce the required minimum significant tree retention or to reduce the number of replacement trees required. Such discretion to waive or change code requirements can lead to uncertainty about what and who the code covers and why some projects qualify for a waiver or reduction while others don't. Such actions may lead to an appearance of unfairness or favoritism, as well as mistrust or suspicion, especially when such discretionary decisions lack transparency and a clear foundation. Fair and equitable treatment of all citizens is protected by the consistent enforcement of regulations. While not on tonight's agenda, the Tree Code team has also proposed that Council establish an urban forestry advisory panel, a potential iteration of which is a standalone tree board. As Council is aware, the current PRCS board has a very broad scope of responsibility, which was only increased by the 2012 decision to add trees to the board's duties. A decade later, as confirmed by the report released just today by the UN, climate change has brought the need to protect our urban canopy to the forefront, raising issues such as environmental degradation and socioeconomic inequities that are imperative for our city to address and to address quickly. A standalone tree board, as many of our neighboring communities already have in place, is a necessity if we are to protect our current urban forest, as well as create a more climate resilient community for all. I ask that Council consider the UFAP proposal in the near future. Thank you for your consideration and for your hard work.
Thank you, Ms. Hildy.
Next is Rebecca Jones.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Jones, former Shoreline resident for 16 years with family still in Shoreline. I'm speaking in support of the Tree Preservation Code team's recommendation in regard to Amendment 2T to define a tree to be significant at 6 inches DBH. This minor adjustment in the code could have big benefits for the citizens of Shoreline. By allowing trees the opportunity to grow larger, they are able to maximize the benefits they provide to you. At 6 inches DBH, a Western red cedar would be approximately 22 years old and intercept 305 gallons of stormwater runoff and sequester 63 pounds of CO2. Tree 114 on 5th Avenue Northeast is a Western red cedar at 46 inches in diameter and is 67 years old. This tree intercepts 6,023 gallons of stormwater runoff and reduces atmospheric carbon of over 274 pounds. Allowing trees to mature clearly has a huge impact because trees work harder as they age. If the code reflected defining a significant tree as 6 inches DBH, more trees would be given the opportunity to mature and help replenish Shoreline's rapidly diminishing tree canopy. I'd like to highlight this recommendation from the Climate Impacts and Resiliency Study commissioned by the City of Shoreline in June 2020. The retention of mature trees, quote, the retention of large mature trees will increase climate resiliency. Mature trees do the work of supporting wildlife habitat, improving air and water quality, retaining carbon, and mitigating stormwater runoff and urban heat area islands that are affecting Shoreline. Lastly, surrounding regional cities have determined that 6 inches DBH is the appropriate measurement for defining a significant tree. It is a thoughtful recommendation of the Tree Preservation Code team, and I urge you to approve this change to the code for the benefit of us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones.
Next is Noreen Federer. And Ms. Federer is joining us on the telephone this evening. So go ahead, press *6 when you're ready. Noreen, can you press *6 on your telephone, please?
Ms. Federer, we can't unmute you. If you can press *6 on your telephone, we'll be able to hear you. All right, let's go ahead and pass Ms. Federer and we'll return to her if you're able to connect with her offline.
Sounds good. Next up is Janet Way.
Good evening, Council. Nice to see you all, as always. I am here, of course, to speak about trees, along with so many others. As you know, I'm with Shoreline Preservation Society, and we support the Tree Preservation Code team amendments enthusiastically. I'm just noting that the item that Manager Terry spoke about how everyone should submit their ideas about how we can enact climate change protections. It couldn't be more timely than to just say, save more trees. That's what we should be doing. They have ecosystem services. They provide ecosystem services. There are design options you can deploy to protect more of the trees on Fifth Avenue. I know you can do it. We've done it before. And it's about environmental justice. My neighborhood has taken the brunt of the tree cutting. And my neighborhood in Parkwood and others up and down I-5 for light rail. And so many other projects are going in, and we're just gonna get hammered over and over and over. So it's up to you to take every possible action to save as many trees as you possibly can. So I'm just asking you to bend over backward. And I know you care about trees. You've all told me so. And so I'm asking you to just really take your strongest possible, put your hearts in the right place and save our trees, our mature trees, and they will save us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Way. I noticed there's a hand up among the attendees. We don't recognize people out of order here, and you have to sign them in advance. Mr. Malek, if you have a concern that needs to be immediately addressed, can you either send me or the city manager an email, and we'll see if we can get it taken care of.
Suzanne Summing is next.
My name is Suzanne Summing. I'm a resident of Shoreline and a member of the Tree Preservation Code Team, hereafter the Code Team. As mentioned in the Code Team summary submitted earlier to Council, Amendment 7, Ray SMC 2050-350 pertains to tree retention. Both city staff and the Planning Commission have approved increasing the code's current 20% to 25% tree retention. As originally submitted, this proposal included a tree retention incentive table. When city staff studied the table, it was opposed to the types of incentives to developers because they would require interdepartmental review and approval. Subsequently, the table of incentives was withdrawn by the Code Team. However, city staff stated that it was not opposed to looking into other incentives if they were built into, quote, department's work plan, unquote. The Code Team would like an assurance from the City Council that it will direct city staff to explore other workable incentives to developers to retain more existing trees. There is a precedent for such incentives. In Redmond, Washington, Muni Code 20D-80-20-0701, under General Tree Protection Standards, its minimum tree retention percentage is 35% of all significant trees. And in subsection B, incentives for higher levels of tree protection, it states, quote, the administrator may grant reductions or adjustments to other site development standards if protection of 35% of the existing healthy trees is exceeded. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Summing.
Next is Jonna Reeder. I don't see her in the list of attendees. Jonna, if you're here, can you please raise your hand? And if you're dialing by telephone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9.
Let's go ahead and move on. And if you see a hand, we can add her in right after the next speaker.
Okay, so next is Kara Pomeroy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kara Pomeroy. I live in Shoreline in North City area. I'm addressing the agenda item 9B1 about the proposed tree codes. As many people have mentioned already, and I'm sure you're aware, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published another reminder today about what we are facing. Climate change is not in the future, it is right now. And it's our responsibility, each and every one of us, as private citizens, as a city council and staff, to do what we can to slow the planet's warming. This includes, among many things, keeping our tree canopy intact and making decisions with our eyes to the future and right now, actually, because it's happening now, and not just what seems convenient. So I'm asking the council to please approve the amendments 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the proposed tree codes, which other people have been talking about tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pomeroy.
Next is Kathleen Russell.
Kathleen Russell. Oops, sorry. Resident of Shoreline. The Tree Preservation Code team submitted 9 proposed tree code amendments to the city in November 2020, plus a Title 12 amendment and a proposal for the Urban Forestry Advisory Panel. We completed the development code amendment application for each code submission, which included a description of the code, the purpose, and answered the questions: is the code in accordance with the comprehensive plan? Will the amendment adversely affect public health? And is the amendment not contrary to the best interest of citizens? We submitted a 47-page document with research and footnotes. These proposed codes were studied by city staff for 10 months and presented to the Planning Commission over the past 4 months. This process is available to every citizen in Shoreline. You received a summary letter dated February 24, reviewing the current status of the codes submitted. We are expecting that council will have the opportunity to review all of the proposed codes. Since so many citizens are interested in the preservation of trees, we are limited to emails and these 2-minute comments to further expand on the proposed tree codes. Several of the substantive tree code amendments are not recommended by staff. As referenced in our letter, there are compelling reasons why these tree codes are in the best interest of the citizens of Shoreline and support the city's stated goal, zero net loss of Shoreline's tree canopy. Thank you for your consideration and review.
Thank you, Ms. Russell.
Next is Peter Eglick.
It looks like you're unmuted, Mr. Eglick, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. I don't live in the city of Shoreline, but I am the attorney for the Innis Arden Club, and I'm speaking tonight on its behalf. Innis Arden is, as you know, in the city of Shoreline. It has over 500 residential lots. So at least 1,000 or more residents of the city of Shoreline. Innis Arden is the steward for over 50 acres of forested reserve tracts. And in the last few years has planted hundreds of trees. So we don't take a back seat to anyone with concern for trees or for maintaining our forests. However, the club is concerned that the amendments before you, particularly the ones that would increase stringency with regard to DBH, diameter, and flexibility on the part of the director with regard to replacement trees, are really over the top. And they don't really look at the overall issue for the city. You've been presented with one perspective on that issue from a very well-organized citizen group, what's called, I guess, the team. But I don't think that that team represents the 80% of the area of the city that will be impacted by these amendments. Part of the problem in that regard is that if you look at the letter I submitted on January 18th to the Planning Commission, the city has failed to comply with its own comprehensive plan in citizen outreach. Certainly the team knows what's going on, the Planning Commission knows what's going on, you folks know what's going on, but do 80% of the citizenry in the city know what is now before you, which would increase the stringency of tree regulations? And has anyone considered the countervailing considerations such as solar access? We believe the answer is no, and that more work is needed before these items are adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eglick. Mr. Malek emailed and indicated he believed he had signed up, but apparently something went wrong. So I'm going to allow him to speak. And Ms. Reeder and Ms. Federer, if you were in the attendee list, please raise your hand. I see Ms. Reeder has raised her hand. So let's go ahead with Ms. Reeder first, and then Mr. Malek.
Mayor Scully, we had Robert Gregg as number 21.
I apologize. Number 21. Let's go with Mr. Gregg. My error.
Good evening, Council. Thank you. My name is Robert Gregg. I live in Clinton, Washington. I'm the owner's rep and construction manager for 2 multifamily projects at the 145th light rail station. In fact, little side note, last week we recorded what I believe to be the first land use covenant for affordable housing that you, the council, worked so hard on updating. So I just want to know that your work is well received, and the first one's been recorded now. These 2 projects total 150 units. Will generate 30 affordable housing units. And we're just a little bit ahead of the gentleman from AAA. Phase 1 on 152nd will start construction this month. And phase 2, the permits will be going in this month. As the AAA gentleman mentioned, we use a lot of triple phase on the construction. And we can live without it, but that requires a lot of the machinery then being internal combustion engines, and it's heavy equipment, heavy machinery. They're not the cleanest or quietest pieces of equipment on the earth. We're more than happy to live with overhead and agree to connect underground as soon as it's available. But we do request that you allow for overhead 3-phase power in the interim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. And Ms. Similchick-Smith, I see that Ms. Reeder has joined and has her hand up. Are we able to call her next?
Yes. Ms. Reeder, go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, can people hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, good. Sorry, I got confused about whether the comments were earlier or whether they were later on the agenda. But I'm Jonna Reeder. I live really next door to the 198th Street project, and I'm really commenting on your policies that you're working on around trees and tree removal. A number of us wrote letters last year asking to retain trees and even suggesting ways that they could be retained on that property where the build will go. As I understand, the city owns or co-owns that lot, so should have a lot of input into what is done. Yeah, I was really concerned that the initial paperwork that was given, they were going to cut down 14 of 14 trees on the 2 lots. I've now heard that's only 13 of 14. But I really wish that could be increased. That's really important to clean the air and deal with heat. Every tree, these are big mature trees. I can see them out the window of my condo. To retain them is very important. Yeah, I don't know what was said earlier. But I really think, I looked at the document they sent, it was 71 pages. I don't care what the 71 pages are. I think the real priority needs to be in retaining trees, and I hope that you can work to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reeder. And I don't see any other hands up for Ms. Federer. So if we can do Mr. Malek, and I believe that will conclude our list.
Hello?
Go ahead, Mr. Malek.
Terrific. Hi, I'm Jack Malek, resident of Shoreline for the past 20 years. I'm also a realtor with Windermere, and I happen to have sold the projects, both to the folks that Mr. Gregg is engineering for, and for the AAA folks that Mr. Kelly has spoken to. There are several other folks in that area that are under contract right now. Those contracts are threatened by the fact that they can't get, that the developers and builders cannot get underground power or power in general, three-phase power, to construct the buildings and to operate them after they are constructed. So it's not just a matter of putting them up, it's also a matter of running them and, after the fact. This is something we've been pushing hard for. October 25th was one of, I believe, two, high-level meetings with the city council to demonstrate, the need for building out our light rail areas and putting up housing of this kind and by transit-oriented development. And we were wondering, the principal question was, why aren't we developing fast enough? I do know for a fact that utilities was one of the issues. I think to hold this project up in any way, shape, or form, where people have tens of millions of dollars, and that's a fact, tens of millions of dollars out there, trying to put these buildings together to benefit and to see through our overarching vision for years here, I think is just mandatory. We really need to, award that overhead temporary power, as we have to Sound Transit to construct the station area and allow for the operation, which all of them are happy to underground this, when the conduit is available to do so. But I think it's imperative that we move forward now with, as fast as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malek. I still don't see Ms. Federer, so Ms. Simmelcheck-Smith, I believe that concludes the public comment portion, correct?
That's correct.
All right, great, thank you. Next up is item 7, which is the consent calendar. Deputy Mayor Robertson.
I move to approve the amended consent calendar.
Is there a second? All right, motion and a second. Ms. Simmelcheck-Smith, will you please conduct the vote?
Councilmember Ramsdale.
Aye.
Councilmember Poby.
Aye.
Councilmember Roberts.
Aye.
Mayor Scully.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Robertson.
Aye.
Councilmember McConnell.
Aye.
Councilmember Mork.
Aye.
The amended consent calendar passes unanimously. Next up is action item 8A, which is a quasi-judicial item, an action on preliminary formal unit lot subdivision. I'm going to skip the numbers, but it's in the agenda. And before we begin, I need to read admonition on quasi-judicial appearance of fairness. Before council discusses subdivision number PLN 20-0139, need to remind council members of the rules regarding the appearance of fairness doctrine. It requires government decision makers to conduct non-court hearings and proceedings in a way that is fair and unbiased in both appearance and fact. Therefore, council members must disclose any communications they may have received about the proposed subdivision outside of the record. These are known as ex parte communications and may be either written or oral communications. The appearance of fairness checklist is displayed on your screen. Please take a minute to review it, and then please raise your hand if there are any ex parte communications or other conflicts to disclose. All right, seeing no hands, thank you very much. And I believe Ms. Lee will be doing the staff presentation.
Yes, good evening. I'm Kate Lee. I'm a senior planner with the city. I will go ahead and share my screen. That's working. Yeah, so this item is a preliminary formal subdivision. This is a type C application, which means it is a quasi-judicial decision, as just mentioned. Type C decisions require findings, conclusions, an open record public hearing, and recommendations prepared by the review authority for the final decision. The hearing examiner held a public hearing and has made a recommendation to City Council. And the City Council is the decision-making authority for preliminary formal subdivisions. The site is located on the east side of Meridian Avenue North between North 147th and 148th Streets. And the site is located in the Parkwood neighborhood, about 1/3 of a mile west of the 148th Street light rail station. On the left shows a vicinity map of where the project is located in the Parkwood neighborhood. And on the right is a 2020 aerial image showing the 11 single-family
parcels with a single family residence on each lot. The proposal is for 70 unit lots with 2 tracks. Tract A is an access tract for vehicular circulation throughout the site, and Tract B is common outdoor space. Each proposed lot is rectangular in shape, containing the necessary footprint for an attached single-family home and a portion of landscaping, walkways, and driveways into private garages. Building, site development, right-of-way, and wastewater permits have been approved, but issuance of those permits are pending approval of this preliminary formal subdivision. This slide shows the process history for this application. A SEPA, State Environmental Policy Act determination of non-significance, was made on November 22nd, 2021. No appeal was filed during that time period, and there was a public hearing before the hearing examiner on January 18th, 2022. During the notice of application comment period, there were 25 public comments, and 1 comment was filed after that comment period. The primary concerns raised by the public comments were regarding increases in density, tree removal and protection, parking and traffic, and stormwater. These comments are all included in Exhibit 10 to Attachment B. At the hearing examiner public hearing on January 18th, 4 people spoke in opposition to the proposal with concerns again about tree preservation and impacts to wildlife, as well as concerns with density, traffic, and stormwater. 2 of these oral comments were submitted in writing to the hearing examiner clerk, and those appear in Attachment B as Exhibits 25 and 26. Public comment prior to and after the hearing examiner meeting are in Attachment B as Exhibits 22 through 27, as Exhibits 22 and 27 through 29. Both city staff and the hearing examiner have concluded the proposed subdivision has met applicable requirements of the Shoreline Municipal Code. It will make appropriate provisions for the public health, safety, and welfare through payment of required impact fees and construction of required frontage improvements. It will also serve the public use and interest through the creation of 70 new dwelling units in our region, which is experiencing a housing shortage. It also promotes density near planned transit improvements. The hearing examiner recommends approval of application PLN 20-0139, subject to all listed conditions, and city staff concurs with this recommendation. And that's all I have for you tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. This is an action item, so we usually start with a motion. Would someone like to make a motion? Deputy Mayor Robertson.
I move that we approve the hearing examiner's recommendation.
Second.
Motion and a second. Would you like to speak to your motion, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. There was a well put together presentation, and I guess I agreed with the findings. Thank you.
Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you. I just have one question about this proposed plan, and that's about access and circulation. I believe there was a slide that showed the proposed subdivision, including circulation. Can you put that back up, please? I'm trying to find it in the staff report.
I was trying to screen share. Let's see, let me try that again here.
So I just want to be clear, there is circulation both in north and south, is that correct?
Correct. So it loops around. There's access off of 148th. It loops around and comes down to 147th. There's no access off of Meridian.
Right, but I mean, there is north-south access, and so traffic would not necessarily be flowing only one direction. And that's
correct. Yeah, there's multiple points that a vehicle could enter the site.
Okay. And the other, I guess, a related question is this a private road that's being developed, and there'd be does the city have any restrictions on how either the neighborhood is, I mean, this, I don't think, I'm getting close to approaching what is not allowed in the code, but, or in this discussion, but does the city have any requirements or any code requirements about how individuals can access, or neighborhood associations may be able to access and communicate with the residents living in these off of a private road like this?
I mean, it is a private access tract. It's not a public right of way. So the city will not have an easement for public use through this access tract, but it will be an easement for other vehicles within the same development to travel across it, and the walkways for, there will be easements for other units to use those, same as there would be for any private property. But yeah, these will not be for public easement. That being said, I mean, it would be up to a person wanting to enter the property. I mean, whether there's fencing or things like that. Fences that are facing the public rights of way are limited to 3.5 feet. So there at least would be some visual recognition there if someone were to walk through the access tract. I mean, I'm not sure if I know exactly what, how to best answer.
That's fine.
But these are not public rights of way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Ramsdale.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Scully. I've got a few questions. You mentioned that it looks like on the map there is open space. Approximately how many square feet of open space is on this tract?
I mean, I can get that number to you. I can look it up. I don't know offhand. I would, if I provided you a number right now, it would be a guess without looking back at the material. But this is the area where a grove of significant sized trees are being retained.
Okay.
And, it's a fairly good chunk of the property. I can get you a figure, but
okay.
I'll need to look it up and stop sharing my screen.
Okay, and will there be any amenities in that public open space? Let's say like any playground equipment for children, or picnic tables, or anything like that where the community can congregate?
There won't be any playground equipment. There will be some, walking paths through it. I have some renderings, some landscape plans that I can pop up, but would need a minute to be able to find those. But no, there's no playground equipment proposed in that area.
Okay. Yeah, the reason why I ask, I mean, it's as density increases, we know that the incidences of depression and anxiety increase as density increases. So one of the mitigating factors of those mental health conditions is access to public open space. And I do know, to open space. So there is a little courtyard there, and I think Twin Ponds is not too far from this development as well. So that could be another. I think that's only about 2 blocks away, 2 blocks north when I'm looking at the map. So, okay, that's the only questions I have. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Councilmember Povey.
Thank you, Mayor. I think with the public comment feedback, I saw increase in density and also tree removal protections. In summary, with this 4 that you listed, can you just, possibly in a statement or 2, just summarize how you had to, make some significant changes due to the feedback from the public?
The initial proposal was for 72 townhouses, and after the first comment letter was provided by city staff with concerns about tree retention, the development did decrease to 70 units in order to provide better tree retention of existing trees. That's both the tree grove I pointed out in tract B, and also there are some existing trees being retained on the eastern side of the property. So that is one aspect there.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments from council? Thank you. I'd just like to briefly highlight a couple of things. First of all, we are limited in what we can do and consider here. We're in a quasi-judicial capacity, which means we have to sort of apply the code to the proposal in the light of the hearing examiner's recommendation. I believe this meets the code requirements, and I will be voting to approve it, and I encourage other council members to do the same. Wanted to comment very briefly on a couple of other sort of broader issues that are implicated by the code sections that we apply. And one is the environmental benefits, and this proposal is saving some, but not all the trees in the site. What we get as an environmental benefit out of it, how the community benefits, is we get 72 residences on a fairly compact area. And if you take those 72 and you move them outside of the city, you put them each on a 1 acre lot or a 5 acre lot, you lose a heck of a lot more trees than are lost by keeping them in Shoreline. And the second issue is we passed this as a code change, the last council did, because there was a tremendous desire for folks to be able to buy starter homes in Shoreline. And our realization that the existing single family housing stock simply wasn't going to provide that there really was nothing we could do to make a house on a 7,200 square foot lot affordable, except in a very few isolated areas. And one solution to this was to change the housing types that are available, including what's being proposed here, which is townhomes where someone owns the lot on which the house sits and the house all the way up. And they're attached, so it's not a detached single family residence, but it nonetheless is a place that will hopefully be affordable and where we can get 70 new families into actually owning a home in Shoreline. So for all these reasons, I will be voting yes on this, and I encourage other council members to do the same. Are there other comments from council? Councilmember Ramsdale.
Yeah, I would just like, thank you, Mayor Scalia. Just like to piggyback on your comments about the environmental benefits of having 72 residents living in increased density near public transit or near the light rail station. And if those 70 people were had to commute by car, each person would be contributing about 4.3 tons of greenhouse gases every year. So this will, if most of these folks are using light rail, it'll save a tremendous amount of carbon and reduce our carbon footprint as a community. So.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments from council? All right, Ms. Simmelcheck-Smith, will you conduct the votes?
Councilmember Ramsdale.
Aye.
Councilmember Povey.
Aye.
Councilmember Roberts.
Aye.
Mayor Scully.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Robertson.
Aye.
Councilmember McConnell.
Aye.
And Councilmember Mork.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes unanimously, which brings us to study item 9A, which is discussion of required electrical utility undergrounding in the South Shoreline /148th light rail station area. Ms. Terry, who's doing the staff reports? Mr. Norris.
You, Mayor Scully.
Mr. Norris. Oh, sorry.
Thanks.
Mr. Norris, and I know Tricia Yunke will be assisting, and potentially Juniper Nami.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Mayor Scully, Deputy Mayor Robertson, John Norris, Assistant City Manager. Here to present this item tonight. This is a discussion item, so no action is required, but staff is looking for some direction from the council tonight on the policy questions and the alternatives that are presented in your staff report. And as the city manager just said, Tricia Yunke, our city engineer, and Juniper Nami, our sound transit project manager here as well. They've worked on this issue for a number of months, and so here to answer any questions and support me in that at the end of my presentation here. And I know you've got a long meeting, so I will try and move through this fairly quickly and go from there. All right, just by way of overview for tonight, I will try and quickly cover what is currently in the municipal code. Chapter 1320 provides the city's regulations for electrical and communication facilities. Talk about that in relation to the Sound Transit Linwood Link Extension Project. That's what STLE stands for. Sorry for the acronym on the slide. So that is the Sound Transit Project that is currently under construction between Seattle and Linwood, and of course in our community as well. Understand the interplay between our undergrounding code the Sound Transit project and private development that is in permitting and in planning stages in the South Station area. You heard some public comment from members of the development community tonight around that. And then look at those alternatives and some policy questions, as I mentioned. Specifically with regard to the code, I don't want to belabor this because obviously council can look at the code, but really this does provide the basis for the city's electrical and communication facilities undergrounding policy. There is a purpose statement in the code which provides kind of the why of undergrounding of electrical facilities, and that really speaks to better system reliability, increased safety, and less visual clutter or aesthetics for our community. And so those are the reasons why the code does place a high value on undergrounding of electrical facilities. There is a trade-off for that, and that so there's a high cost to undergrounding as opposed to installing electrical facilities overhead. The council has discussed that even with our own capital projects, kind of the trade-offs between undergrounding electrical facilities versus the cost to do so. And so the purpose of undergrounding is again articulated in our code. As well, there are some exceptions to the undergrounding code. Those are identified in section 1320.040, but that list is pretty finite. So there are some facilities that do not have to be placed underground if they're new facilities such as streetlights, satellites and antennas that wouldn't work underground, other facilities such as that, high voltage transmission lines. But really there are very few exceptions. And one of those exceptions is not temporary construction power, which we'll talk about in a second. Finally, section 1320.050 provides for when undergrounding is required for electrical facilities in our community. Generally, facilities that exist now are allowed to remain overhead. So existing wires and poles that are in our community now do not have to be undergrounded unless certain things happen. One is if there is a city project that may disturb that overhead wire, if there's a joint trenching project initiated by usually another utility partner, or if there is new electrical facilities. And that's really what's at issue here today. So new extensions, additions, duplications, or rebuilds of any new facilities in an area with no overhead wire. So that's when new electrical facilities go in, the code is pretty clear that those facilities need to be undergrounded. And so how does that interplay with the Sound Transit project? As is noted in the staff report, the Linwood Lake Extension project requires more robust three-phase power. Single-phase power is often the type of power that is servicing much of our community, single-family residential neighborhoods. Three-phase power allows for higher voltages. So in many development projects, especially commercial projects or multifamily projects, and the Sound Transit project as well. And so for construction of the Sound Transit project, for ultimately operation of the Sound Transit garage and station, and for the traction power substation or TPSS, which is really the kind of the heart of the light rail system, if you will, and that's what makes light rail operate. And there are multiple TPSSs along the Linwood Link extension alignment. There is one in Shoreline at 151st and 3rd, so just north of where the South Station site is. And that needs to be electrified in order for light rail to operate. So all of those facilities need three-phase power in addition to the construction of the project. In order to provide for that, the Sound Transit project was relying on an upgrade of underground three-phase power that runs north-south along 5th Avenue Northeast. There currently is three-phase underground power in 5th Avenue Northeast that's considered direct buried cable. So it's cable or power lines that are directly in the ground and not in conduit. That's reached the end of its useful life. It can't really be connected to and really won't service the Sound Transit project. Seattle City Light had planned to upgrade that in the duct bank project. That duct bank project was delayed due to funding constraints from Seattle City Light. Staff at the city, I know staff at Sound Transit really pushed City Light to construct this duck bank project on time so that it would be in place for the Sound Transit Linwood Lake Extension project. That hasn't happened, and therefore that project continues to be delayed from when it was initially to be brought online really in the 2023 timeframe. Seattle City Light is now explaining to us that really it's 2027 is the earliest at which that duck bank would be completed. That is after when revenue service is supposed to begin for the Sound Transit project, which is June of 2024. And so with this delay in the duck bank project, obviously there's an issue there with the ongoing operation for the station and the garage, as I mentioned. The city did permit temporary overhead construction power so that the Sound Transit Light Rail station garage and the station site at 148th could be constructed in 2020. So that was approved. So new overhead temporary construction power was constructed along Northeast 148th Street, pulling that three-phase power from existing overhead wires on 8th Avenue Northeast to the station site. And in order for that, for this three-phase power line to be used on an interim basis going forward to provide for operation of the Sound Transit station and garage, there would be a needed change in the code, given that code requirement I mentioned earlier does not allow for new ongoing power. And so just here are a couple of images of this overhead three-phase power that has been constructed on 148th. Again, this is temporary construction power. Looks like power lines, so looks like, you know, not a lot of probably super interesting images here, but did just want to show this new temporary construction power. This picture here to the left is actually along 8th Avenue. So this line here is the existing overhead three-phase power. So that has been in our community for a long time, will continue to exist as overhead power. This middle photo shows 148th Street looking west towards I-5 and the station site. And these poles here are new temporary construction power poles. And again, the code would require those to be removed once the construction of the Sound Transit project is complete. And this final photo, again, is just looking closer towards 5th Avenue. In the background there, you can faintly see the Sound Transit construction site. So similarly, there's also an issue with electrification of the TPSS for the traction power substation, as I mentioned, for the Sound Transit project. Getting interim power to that site so the train can operate is also an issue given the delay of the duck bank project. For this issue, Sound Transit, Seattle City Light, and the city have been looking at other interim power solutions given just in order to try and keep the Sound Transit project on schedule to upgrade and rebuild existing power lines along Northeast 152nd Street. That would run roughly from 6th Avenue to 3rd Avenue, where they would then underground at the TPSS. As a rebuild is again not allowed by code, this would also require, this interim power solution would also require a code amendment. And here again are some more images of the existing overhead power lines along 152nd. This is existing overhead three-phase power. So again, this is on 152nd. On the leftmost photo here, looking west towards 6th Avenue, that existing three-phase power then terminates here just east of 5th Avenue. And then again, on the other side of 5th Avenue, looking towards 3rd Avenue, as we head down towards the freeway here, these are existing single-phase power poles. So these would be removed and replaced with overhead three-phase power if in fact this alternative solution allowing for overhead interim power is allowed and through a code amendment that council would need to authorize. So this is a convoluted map, so I apologize for that. This is included in your staff report as attachment A, but really, I know there's a lot here and it's somewhat busy, but really does try and depict what's happening in terms of the current condition for electrical facilities in the South Station area or the 145th Station sub area, and then some of the proposed proposals as well for alternative overhead power. And so again, just to orient council, this is I-5 here. As you can see, here is the South Station 148th site where the new light rail station and garage will be. The TPSS, as I mentioned, that operates or provides power to operate the light rail system is here along 3rd Avenue, just between 151st and 152nd. This orange dotted line here is the existing underground direct buried cable. So that is the 3-phase power that is directly buried in the dirt that would be replaced by the SCL duct bank project, which again has been delayed, necessitating staff looking at alternatives for potentially for overhead power. Along 8th Avenue is existing 3-phase overhead power. So that exists now and has existed for some time. And so this purple line is the temporary construction power that has been pulled from 8th Avenue to provide for temporary construction power for the Sound Transit site. So this is what was permitted in June of 2020 to allow for that. This other purple line is again the proposed upgrade of 3-phase power that would run along 152nd. This has not been constructed, and given that this is not for construction, but would need to be in place interimly to power the site, this currently is not allowed by the city's code. You did hear, I think, from some members of the development community, this assemblage here is owned by AAA Management. And these assemblages here are owned by Spectrum Development. One proposal as well is to allow for overhead interim power or temporary construction power, I would say, to start with for AAA Management's proposed development here. That theoretically could turn into interim ongoing power as well until this duct bank project is constructed. So looking at both interim power once construction is complete, and then for private development, some level of construction power as well. And so with regard to private development, as I just mentioned, although the city did permit temporary construction power, 3-phase power for the Sound Transit project, in relooking at the code, it is now very clear that even temporary construction power is not allowed by the code. And so that is a proposal that staff wants council to consider tonight and give direction to staff to look at bringing back a code amendment to allow for temporary construction power to be placed overhead. As you can see in the 3rd bullet point here, staff's proposal would be to put that as an exception to the undergrounding regulations, so that would be available to development community citywide or anyone who is looking to construct. Again, this would be to allow for overhead power to be placed overhead on an interim, a temporary basis just during the construction process. Also a proposal for some overhead interim power to be constructed and remain in place until that duct bank project is completed. We can talk more about that as well. And so in terms of policy questions that staff is looking for from council tonight, as you can see here, is council supportive of an amendment to the code to allow for overhead temporary construction power only? That was listed as option 1 in your staff report. Again, that would be not specific to the station area or to the MUR 70 zone, but would be an exception, which would be allowed citywide for temporary construction power only. So that's the first policy question that staff would be interested in receiving council direction on. The second question is this level of a sense of support of some level of interim overhead power until the SCL planned facilities are installed, specifically in the 145th station area. And that would, again, serve the Sound Transit project, allow the Sound Transit project to stay on schedule so that start of revenue service would occur in June of 2024, would also support some level of development. How that interim overhead power solution is structured as part of a code requirement then may depend exactly on who that would serve in terms of the development community. Option 2, as listed in your staff report, provides a certain way to do that. There might be other ways as well. And so staff would probably want a little bit more time to bring back proposed code language. But at this point, we are looking for direction of general council support of whether some level of interim overhead power would be acceptable. Right now, that's not allowed by code and will have an impact on the Sound Transit project and some development if that is not allowed going forward. So from a recommendation standpoint, staff is supportive of a near-term or immediate code amendment. We could bring back a code amendment for temporary construction power as an exception to our undergrounding requirement or regulations immediately. I think it's possible we could even amend the code to bring this back so that it's up for council consideration for next week. I think, as you heard, there are development projects that are in need of that temporary construction power in the very near term. And so that is something that staff could bring back very quickly if council is supportive of that. Also, staff is recommending that we do look at interim overhead power solutions in certain circumstances until those SCL planned undergrounding facilities, really namely the Fifth Avenue Duck Bank projects, are installed. We would, again, I guess, recommend that we take a little more time to understand exactly how to put a code proposal together for council's consideration. But that is something that staff also recommends that we would like to bring back for your further consideration. And then finally, definitely staff recommends continuing to strongly engage with Seattle City Light on the ultimate Duck Bank project and making sure that Fifth Avenue Duck Bank project is completed as soon as possible to serve ultimately the Sound Transit project and development in the 145th station sub-area. And with that, Mayor, happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Since this is a study item, we can go straight to questions and discussion. Are there council members with questions or Councilmember Mork?
I'm interested in, do you have any concerns that City Light will not go through with building their duck bank? Is there any concern that they will, if they delay till 2027, that they'll delay to 2047?
Good question, council member. Thank you. City Light has told us that they are planning to construct the duck bank. I think their staff has had some concerns that this has been pushed back. I know we are continuing to work with City Light to get a firmer commitment from them, from the utility, so that they will state specifically when that will be constructed to serve our community. I know at the staff level, staff to staff, we work very closely with Seattle City Light staff, and they do understand the importance of this project. They clearly understand the importance for the Sound Transit project and for private development. So I think at the staff level, there's a strong commitment to designing and getting that project done. I think it's at a higher level of funding consideration for the utility. And we are definitely continuing to work to get a strong written commitment from the utility that they are going to honor that and construct that project.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Is there any language that could be put in either of these amendments that will encourage the completion of same, or sunset it and we need to go through this again if there is a extended delay?
A good question. And I don't know if, not sure if code language would, I mean, really, this is City Light's infrastructure. So the direct, this is their infrastructure that they are replacing with their new infrastructure. So it's their capital project. The Duck Bank project is they're replacing their current direct buried cable. So I don't know if there's anything in code we could, and they're the electrical utility provider in our community, anything in code that would force them to upgrade. I mean, these are their customers as well. So they do have a natural, there's a reason why they, of course, want to upgrade their infrastructure. So I don't think it's a want issue. I think it's more of a funding and timing question.
Yes, I can appreciate the circumstance. I'm just concerned about the city's leverage. Let me ask another question for my colleagues who are also interested. For the temporary power that would be citywide for any developer, what kind of time frame is temporary?
Question. Trish, go ahead. I mean, Trish, if you want to jump in on the construction side, temporary, then we can also maybe talk time frame for interim too.
Yeah. So if I understood the question correctly, how do you define temporary? If we're trying to limit it as temporary construction power. So in my mind, the idea of the temporary would be just for construction. So it would need to be removed prior to the building being occupied, and it would be conditioned as such. Therefore, it could, and building construction has a relatively finite time frame of a couple of years that they would still need that construction power, but before they could get occupancy, it would need to be removed and no longer functioning.
So what if Seattle City Light did this? This circumstance is not something that that Sound Transit asked for, the developers asked for. What if a City Light isn't ready? What happens? Are they prevented from using their building then until City Light can provide it?
Well, that's where there needs to be a focus on both temporary power for construction, but also what is their long-term power solution. And that's why we have this option 1 and option 2. And option 1 only supports the temporary construction power, which we actually is included in option 2 as well. But then we add on to option 2, what are their limitations, or what do they need to do in order to get their permanent power or interim power if it's a intermediary step to have power, versus using the temporary construction power to fully power their building.
Councilmember, if I can, also just piggyback off that, I apologize. I think the other thing to keep in mind with allowing temporary construction power is that would be available in other parts of the city as well, where there isn't necessarily this more geographically specific issue in the 145th station sub area with the Duck Bank project. So in other parts of the city, if there wasn't a really close underground connection, some other development project could then extend temporary construction power to their project just for that construction window, as Tricia said, and then they would have to ultimately connect for an operational sense for their development to underground power. So it provides that possibility for temporary construction power citywide.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to ask those questions. I feel that we don't have many options and that we do need to support this. I just want to make sure that the city does not lose leverage and that we are not signing up for indefinite temporary power. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you. Like Councilmember Mark, I have several questions. And if you can't answer tonight, I'm appreciative to the extent that you can answer over the week, that would be appreciated. The first question was related to answer to Councilmember Mork, and that was about temporary occupancy. How would temporary occupancy work for the Sound Transit project, which has there is temporary power there existing already.
Do you mean if the interim power isn't allowed?
Yeah, well, if we went with option 1, and there was no, to the extent that you can sort of explain to us what the waiver is with Sound Transit, may affect what code options we have available in the future, because we obviously, our goal and the city's longtime goal is to make sure that Sound Transit is on schedule. But if we only adopt option 1, would that preclude Sound Transit from operating because they don't have they wouldn't be able to occupy the building?
That is correct. If we allowed them temporary construction power, but not an interim power solution, because there is no immediate plan to do the duct bank upgrade that Seattle City Light had planned to do in time for for start of revenue service for occupancy, the Sound Transit would either have to build underground power from whatever location is agreed to all the way to their TPSS and station site at much greater expense than they're already going to. Or they would have to delay opening until they had power.
Okay. The next question is sort of a general question, if you can answer it. What is the expectation that this city or similarly situated cities have in expecting developers to provide undergrounding to their property? Is the general expectation is that a developer will have to bring power from the closest available source, or is there a certain place where either the city of Shoreline or other similar jurisdictions thinks it's unreasonable to bring power from?
Trish, do you want to answer the expectation on development community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we really haven't taken the time to compare how our code is or how other jurisdictions do undergrounding. We're a little bit more familiar with how Seattle does undergrounding, but really haven't looked at any other outside jurisdictions. It's certainly something we could do and bring back to you.
But at this point, in terms of thinking about when we did this for Sound Transit, there was an expectation that the cost was too high to bring it from 10th to 5th, or it was too far to go from 10th to 5th.
No, I'd say the original expectation, I would say, was that it was going to occur through the Fifth Avenue Duct Bank project. If that project went as originally planned for 2023, then that is where Sound Transit would have pulled from, and that's a relatively short distance for them to take underground to either their station or to their TPSS site. During the formulation, it wasn't contemplated to bring power from 8th or some other location because the Fifth Avenue Duct Bank was the primary source of three-phase power. Is that correct, Juniper?
So and Councilmember, between 2016, when we were looking at, and Sound Transit was planning the project, and we were reviewing plans all the way until last year, the assumption was that that duct bank project would be in place and in time, as the city engineer just said, to service both the station, the garage, and the TPSS. We knew that we did permit temporary construction power for construction of the station and the garage in 2020. So we did do that beforehand, because we knew that for construction, the duct bank project wouldn't be online, but for operations, the duct bank project was the solution. And so I know, that is one of the reasons why we are here talking about interim power, not just temporary construction power, given the fact that now there's this delay in this critical project for both development in our community and for the Sound Transit project.
And I think the next question I have is, the permits that were that the city issued to Sound Transit were based on the idea that the duck bank project would be completed, and that would provide the power to Sound Transit's facility.
Correct.
Then that didn't happen. Is it normal for the city or any cities to condition or to issue a permit based on the completion of a public works project of another entity? Or, I mean, what I'm asking is sort of when we're thinking about other utilities such as sewer, as an example, we wouldn't grant an exemption for a developer to not put in or have the required lines for the occupancy of permits. So, I mean, I'm trying to understand how we said to Sound Transit, your permit is okay, when it was based on not on a Sound Transit project, but a Seattle City Light that's not a part of the permit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And let me see if I made sense by kind of making this as a comparison to other projects and other utility work. There is other development projects often have to do a lot of utility work to bring all the necessary utilities. It could be a significantly upgraded water line, either to provide fire flow or just to upgrade service from a small water line to their property. That is the developer's responsibility. They work with Seattle Public Utilities or North City Water District to make provisions for that. We really, in our permitting process, don't get heavily involved. That is the developer's responsibility. That is the developer's risk. If they go along and get their project building permitted and they haven't done that coordination with SPU or with Ronald Wastewater when it was a wastewater district or with Seattle City Light, we take a very light hand on that when we're doing our permitting, and we leave that to the developer. And so they're working at their risk. And so, there's just, again, it's their risk. If they've chosen not to figure those things out before they've gotten their building permit, and a lot of times that utility work does happen at a different time than the actual building work. So there's a lot of different factors that developers use in making decisions as to when they go for those permits. We encourage them to do that early. Often they do work with the utility providers early, and then that becomes a condition of not our permit, but that becomes a condition of their project that they have to extend a water line, or they have to extend a wastewater line, or they have to extend undergrounding or power. Those are separate permits they have to get from the other entities in order to serve their building. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, so I mean, really the expectation is on the developer and needs to continue to be on the developer. We're in this situation because promises were made to these developers, Sound Transit and others, that their project would be complete, and now it's not. So really it's Sound Transit who has the responsibility to build this line, and not necessarily, and they're ought to be working with Seattle City Light to get this project done. And then any future developers would hook onto this work that Sound Transit did and theoretically reimburse Sound Transit for the work. Is that normally how those kind of latecomer agreements work?
Yeah, Trish, do you want,
I do believe that we do have options for latecomers on some utilities, but it's my understanding that latecomers cannot apply to electrical utilities. Perhaps the city attorney could help clarify that. That's my recollection.
No, it's okay. I mean, I don't need it now. I think we're in a position where we have to just move forward with option 2. It seems like the only way forward that's equitable. It's a shame that we're in this situation. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you. Going back to the recommendations you want to hear from us. Option 2, definitely, the staff has been working on trying to figure out how to maneuver through this. and I want to support them. I am very, very concerned that we have Seattle City Light here in the predicament that they have put our, projects with Sound Transit and our city, and that if they didn't see this coming, and now they're thinking the solution is delaying it 4 more years when we've got a light rail stations trying to open up the large developments. These are the big cash cow type of developments for developers and the city and for all the people who want some affordable living, being close to Seattle but not in Seattle, and all this. So I don't know what to say that would be kind at this point of the predicament that our city is in. And I'm just counting on the fact that we are all motivated, including Sound Transit, to get Seattle City Lights cooperation, and just look forward to hearing good news in the future on that. But we can't have a 4-year delay. I mean, Sound Transit cannot have it. They have probably even more on the line. Well, we all do. So thank you, staff, for pointing that out to us, and good luck in your negotiations and your discussions with the other 2 entities who, we all need to work toward a more acceptable solution, because this is not acceptable to me, or I'm sure to the rest of the council, to have Seattle City Light think that delaying something that is so critical to so many things happening in our region, it's just not acceptable. So anyway, I could go on more about that, and I'm sure you've had your own discussions. So thank you very much for the report.
Thank you, Councilmember. Deputy Mayor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor. I can't tell if there's anybody from Seattle City Light among our guests this evening, participants. I wish they were. I wish they were here to answer these questions, because they really aren't questions for our staff. It's questions for Seattle City Light. Councilmember Mork, thank you for asking about getting a commitment from them in writing. My take is that at this point, we cannot trust their word. And that's disappointing. I'm very disappointed in Seattle City Light and the fact that we are having this conversation because they are not making good on a commitment that they have made to this community and to a much bigger community that's relying on that Link Light Rail station to open up and be available to not just citizens of Shoreline, but beyond. This is a major kink, and I'm very disappointed in them. I just want to bring up, I think I only have one question, and it's buried in here, but some just other concerns to point out from the staff report. The fact that back in 2016, the existing direct buried line was considered to be at the end of its useful life and in danger of failing. That was 2016. And so, just another concern. Why has this been put off for as long as it has? Why is this project not considered a priority? I think my only question is, their public utility. Is it possible? Can we ask them for their budget and try to determine what other projects Seattle City Light has deemed more of a priority, where they are channeling their funds? Has something catastrophic happened to their budget in the last 3 or 4 years to make this project not possible? Could it have been foreseen? Should they have been planning on it? I think so. And then finally, I'll say, just again, adding to the list of frustrations, whether or not this does happen in 4 years or beyond, whenever it does happen, it is going to be a massively disruptive project for those folks trying to access the light rail station when it happens. Just add to the list of frustrations and disappointments. And I really hope that we continue to lean extremely heavily on Seattle City Light, so they understand and our community understands our deep frustration with this direction. My sense is that we are, as policy, going to move forward, probably with option 2. That would be my recommendation, because we don't have a choice, and that doesn't feel good at all. So thanks for putting us in this situation, Seattle City Light. Mayor, that's all I have.
That would be a tough act to follow. Other council members with comments? Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions and just to think about. One is there, I guess the only one other question is there a way to limit this ordinance to either to something other than citywide? And I think I'd rather have this sort of narrowly tailored to light rail stations or MUR zones or something like that rather than the entire city.
Councilmember, just to ask a clarifying question, are you talking about the temporary construction power?
Yes.
Or the interim power, temporary construction power? Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that ultimately we could bring back some options for council. It doesn't necessarily have to be citywide. The exceptions right now that are identified in the code are citywide exceptions. But we obviously in developing an ordinance for your consideration, we work with the city attorney's office to see we could, potentially construct an exception for temporary construction power in a certain area. I mean, again, we want to take a look at that, but those are options that we could include with an ordinance discussion that we bring back.
Thank you. I mean, I prefer it narrowed. I just sort of broadly, if the staff could provide some information about other areas where, at least for temporary construction, developers may want power. What other areas in the city might be further away from the existing three-phase power to make sense? So I'm not going to necessarily suggest. I prefer something narrowed, but I want to know sort of where other places might be and what other neighborhoods might be affected. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? I'm going to add my 2 cents, and then I would like to hear from council members Ramsdell and Pobey, just if they have any concerns with where I clearly see that the council going with this. For starters, I share the comments that were made about Seattle City Light. This is not our first challenge with them. I mean, since I've been on council, there have been several times when there have been stuff that's come up that I found just unacceptable, with some dramatic overbilling of residents across the system. But the resolution of that left me feeling very unsatisfied with their approach to customer service. We have an ongoing inequity between Shoreline ratepayers who have to pay to underground when we do a street, and Seattle ratepayers which do not. We've had some other challenges over the years, and to the point where some time ago, I asked when this contract was up and whether this was something we should look into, whether there's an alternative to continuing this relationship with Seattle City Light. It's not up until either 2027 or 2029, a long ways out. So that was sort of set to the side. But now this has happened. And this is not a basis to revisit the contract, unfortunately. But this to me is a big deal. And this to me is what should push us over the line from worrying about maintaining the relationship with the entity and with the city of Seattle to saying, hey, this is not acceptable. This just doesn't work. This isn't an unexpected engineering challenge. This isn't some, dramatic shift in supply chain issues or something. This is just a policy choice that they're just not going to put money in Shoreline. They're going to put it somewhere else. And that to me just doesn't work. I mean, we need to have the same respect that ratepayers get throughout the region, throughout Seattle City Light service area, and saying that this absolutely integral piece of transportation and this absolutely crucial upzoned area, just got to wait until they're ready. I mean, they didn't say 4 years. They said maybe 4 years. That didn't work. So I have asked staff to be aggressive in pursuing negotiations. I have a meeting with the Seattle City Council member myself. I will hope we work together on this and that we don't freelance on our own, but that I think it's time that we as electeds say, this is not okay. The problem, as I understand it, came from within City Light staff. It was not a political decision. The solution, as I understand it, lies with the Seattle City Council, getting those folks to say, hey, this priority needs to shift. We need to treat Shoreline with respect. So that's the direction that I'm hoping staff will go. And that's the direction I'm hoping we as a council give staff to go, which is that we go after a fix to this and we worry less about the long-term relationship and more about saying, don't push us around like this. With that said, other council members have aptly expressed it. We are where we are. Developers need certainty. I mean, a lot of those projects are funded, and you can't go to a bank and say, please loan me money to build a project. I think I'll have power, or we'll be able to construct it, but we might or might not be able to hook it up in 2 years when we complete it. So we do need a solution in place. Otherwise, these projects won't be able to go forward. And I note that in this area, we have a lot of very good requirements. We have park impact fees, transportation impact fees, green building standards, affordable housing mandates, a lot of stuff in there. And we were starting to discuss at our council retreat whether maybe we'd put too much on and it was going to be difficult for these projects to move forward. They are moving forward, and that's fantastic. And I think they're going to move forward in a way that really helps the city. But if you throw yet another straw on the load, an uncertainty about power, then I worry we are going to have folks pulling out, and that Shoreline will become a place that no one's willing to invest. So I encourage us to pursue option 2. I encourage us to get the construction power done at the next meeting, and that we look very soon thereafter at the interim power solution for as many of these properties as possible. I share Councilmember Roberts' concern that we keep this narrowly tailored to fix this problem, and that we not just sort of open up the floodgates to areas where this issue just isn't there, areas of the city where this issue isn't there. And I also want to make sure that we don't end up in a position where the overhead lines become permanent, right? And we need to make sure that it is required that they underground, and that will add to the cost of development. I get that. We didn't create this problem, and I don't have a problem making sure that requirement is shouldered by development. But I don't want developers to have to shoulder the uncertainty of potentially not being able to proceed when they've already invested in the city. So what I've heard council say is basically in agreement with that, and I've seen heads nodding, which is that we're thus far unanimous on option 2. We want a strong push on City Light, and we want to consider both the temporary construction power and the interim power to the structures. Council members Ramsdell and Povey, if you have anything to add, please do, or if you could just each let us know whether you have a disagreement on that, because we haven't heard from either of you yet.
Thank you, Mayor. I think you've said it right. Couldn't have said any better. But what I'm thinking through, and it's heartbreaking knowing this is it's an economical issue, has great impact financially and also on individual contractors here and there. But just want us to step back a little bit and ask ourselves, is there anything that we could have done better? And so I love the first question that came from Councilmember Roberts. Is there any homework that we as a city should have done really to tie the hands of all these agencies that we don't directly have control over? Maybe. But also knowing that this is a policy issue gives us some room to keep pushing as a city and to make sure that people do what they have to do. And so that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Scully. I agree with my colleagues' comments regarding, and I share the frustration that we all have with Seattle City Light. What I'm concerned about, is it possible, I mean, maybe John could answer this question, that if that we write an ordinance that has some level of expiration, and then maybe our city attorney could also answer this question. Does our ordinance could have any kind of legal muscle to be able to incentivize Seattle City Light to complete the project by a certain date, before, let's say, the ordinance would expire? Is that something that is possible to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think Councilmember, kind of similar maybe to the question that Councilmember Mork asked. I don't know if there's an ordinance that we could write that would, again, I think, to me, the leverage to try and get Seattle City Light to commit to and construct this critical piece of infrastructure, as Mayor Scully and others have said, is really a continued push to obtain that commitment and make sure that they, as a utility, follow through with that. Again, the ordinance that we would write would really be more on the development side for allowing for interim power, not an ordinance that would require City Light to do something. I would need to think about legally what sort of control we would have. I mean, again, this is their infrastructure, right? So requiring them to upgrade their infrastructure. I don't know if that is something that we could legally do. You know, and so it's, anyway, I don't know if that answers your question. Again, we can look at that to say, is there some sort of legal teeth we have that really focuses more on City Light? The ordinances that we're talking about really are making it, I think, easier to provide more, really the alternative solution, which is allowing for overhead power as an alternative, which again, I think it was said well by, I forget which council member, that, you know, this isn't necessarily the choice that as a community we'd like to have, but given the constraints and I think the desire to keep the Sound Transit project on schedule is something that, again, staff is proposing that we do move forward with. So I don't know if that answers your question. We can look at that. I'm struggling with finding teeth in an ordinance that would force City Light to upgrade their infrastructure any quicker.
Any other questions or comments from council? Mr. Norris, do you have the direction you need?
I do, Mayor, thank you.
All right. Thank you for the presentation and for the good discussion. We're now going to move to our final agenda item 9B, which is the discussion of ordinance number 955, which is the batch development code amendments. There's 31 slides in the presentation and it's 9:05 p.m. We have done the reading on this, and so I have asked staff to move quickly through the slide presentation just to sort of orient us to this discussion. And of course, if council members need more detail on any particular item, we should ask that question. But I know that we're familiar enough with it that we don't need to be taught from scratch. Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Kate Lee, Senior Planner with the city, and I will just waiting for control over the PowerPoint here. I will go through the first part of this presentation, which is to provide background on our existing code, and then Steve Zafran, Senior Planner with the city, will go through the proposed amendments. I'll move quickly through the slides and then can always go back and ask questions if needed. Let's see. Okay. So this is a discussion regarding tree regulations on private property, which are contained in our development code. These are the questions that we answer when we get phone calls from folks about removing trees. Is a permit required? How many trees need to be retained? How many replacement trees are required? And what kind of tree protection measures are required on a construction site? So a permit is required for a significant size tree when it's 30 inches diameter and breast height or greater. It's in a critical area or buffer. You want to remove more than 6 significant size trees, or it's located in a R zone or residential zone, or MUR 35 or 45. As mentioned, DBH means diameter or breast height. That's measured 4.5 feet from the ground. And then you measure how big around the tree is. That's the circumference divided by pi to get the diameter. So if trees are not exempt, so there's a certain number of trees that are exempt from retention and replacement based on the size of a property. And any beyond that, you need to retain 20% significant size trees. If you don't have a critical area, 30% if your property does contain a critical area or buffer. Significant size tree meets 8 inches DBH for conifers, 12-inch DBH for all others. And the 20% is calculated after removing those partially exempt trees based on the lot size. Those are trees under 30 inches DBH that are not in a critical area or buffer. The Director of Planning and Community Development can allow for a reduction in the minimum significant tree retention percentage if all of these listed criteria are met and demonstrated by the applicant through an arborist report. If trees are not exempt, partially exempt, and they're subject to replacement requirements, the number of replacement trees ranges from 1 to 3 trees. That's based on the size of the tree removed. Replacement tree sizes are 6 feet tall for evergreens, 1.5 inch caliper for deciduous. Generally, applicants have to provide replacement trees on the site. There is an exception to that in the code, and that's listed out here. And we do require tree protection at the drip line or critical root zone. And those can be different. Generally, you want to protect whichever, you want to provide whichever is going to provide greater protection to the tree. So here's an example of how tree retention works on a development site in Shoreline. There's an existing single family home. 2 additional detached single family homes are proposed. There's 40 significant sized trees on the property. The applicant has proposed to remove 19 of those and to retain 21 of those. Because of the size of the lot, 6 of those significant sized trees are exempt from retention and replacement requirements. So once you perform that calculation, the applicant is retaining 62% of significant sized trees, and they are required to provide 28 replacement trees. And a second example on a slightly simpler site, just propose a single family lot where they're proposing a new single family residence. They have 3 trees on the property. Only one is significant size, a 42-inch Western red cedar in the backyard, 2 smaller trees in the front yard that are both under the significant tree size. So they essentially have 1 significant size tree, and in order to meet the 20% retention, that's the tree they have to retain, is the one in the backyard. And that's all I have for you. I'll pass it over to Steve.
I'm actually not seeing Mr. Safran on the presenters.
That's my fault. I just promoted him
Okay.
right now.
There we go. Thanks. Mr. Safran, if you can hear me, there we go.
Oh yeah,
Welcome.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, so I'll run through these pretty quickly. Thanks, Kate, for the kind of the lesson of what we do now. So as you know, this group of tree amendments are mostly citizen proposed, with 1 staff proposed amendment, and they really start out with, as you'll see on the slides, if the planning commission recommended approval, it'll be on the top of the slide, and we'll go through the approval and denied ones. But starting with the C definitions, this would add definitions for critical root zone and the inner critical root zone. It's just mainly a clarification of how we already regulate trees. The planning commission then recommended approval of amending the definition of tree canopy, and also clarifying and the proposed definition of a hazardous tree, and also revising the definition of a landmark tree to be more clarification. It refers to the process of actually landmarking a tree, refers to the code section that does that, and also the commission recommended dropping the definition of a landmark tree from 30 inches down to 24. They did look at the definition of significant tree. The proposal was to drop that to 6 inches for all trees, for conifer and non-conifer, but they did recommend to deny that amendment. And just kind of an example of why they would do that if there was a site, there's pros and cons to dropping the diameter of a significant tree. If it's lower, then perhaps more trees would be subject to the significant tree retention and replacement. But it also kind of works in a con where if you were looking at a site like this and there was 2 trees, one was 6 inches and one was 42 inches, you could really remove the 42 inches and still 42 inch big tree and then keep the 6-inch tree and still meet the code, though you would lose a pretty big tree. So there are, in staff and the Planning Commission's opinion, there are pros and cons to dropping that diameter of a significant tree. The commission did recommend adding a couple more definitions for urban forest and urban tree canopy. Amendment C4, this recommended approval to these amendments would clarify language for greater tree preservation and tree protection language in the purpose of the tree code section. Amendment number 5, the commission agreed by adding the sections for best management practices, site violations, restoration plans, and site investigations. And these have to do with for protection of trees, and the commission agreed that these were all good measures to protect and to restore existing trees on the site. Moving on to amendment number C6, the commission did deny that to change the maximum number of trees that may be removed without a permit, depending on the lot size. Currently, the commission and staff believes it is more equitable the way that it's currently written, where you can remove 3 significant trees on a lot up to 7,200 square feet, and then every 7,200 square feet after that, you can remove 1 additional tree, no matter the size of the lot. And the applicant had proposed putting a cap on that number. Amendment number C7, the commission agreed that the city should increase the minimum tree retention requirements from 20 to 25%. And it should be noted that these are on properties that do not contain critical areas. If it, like Kate said earlier, if a site does contain critical areas, the minimum is 30%. So this would just increase by 5% the minimum significant tree retention on lots without a critical area. Amendment number C8, this would allow staff, this is a staff proposed amendment, to allow the director to waive and not just reduce the minimum tree retention to facilitate other priorities, such as recommendations by a certified arborist, or threats to reasonable use of properties. The C9, the Planning Commission did recommend denial. This would not allow the director to reduce the number of replacement trees on site. So it's either replace all the trees on site or pay the fee in lieu. There's not an option for the director to look at a approved arborist recommendation to reduce some of those trees on site. So the commission did recommend denial of that amendment. And I'll move past this. And then the last amendment, the Planning Commission did recommend approval of amending this section to propose greater tree protection measures, like increasing the height of protection fencing and other things to preserve and protect trees in development areas. And with that, staff is here for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Zevran and Ms. Lee, for an excellent and succinct report. This is a study item, so we can go straight to questions and discussion. Deputy Mayor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor. Really important for us to just start off by thanking the members of our community, members of Safe Shoreline Trees and the Tree Code team for putting together this list of recommendations. We know, I can't imagine how much work was actually put into it. Thank you for all of the commentary that was sent in. And I look forward to having this conversation with the rest of my council colleagues. So in terms of what is put in front of us tonight, for me, it's a really easy yes to agree with all of the Planning Commission's recommendations, which leaves just the denials where there's room for potential discussion. So for me, I felt like the staff did a really nice job with their justifications of explaining in some cases where there was a denial. And for me, the only one that I would like to continue to talk about and question was number C6. And that was where, and really, because I am not the tree expert, I couldn't tell you exactly if the numbers in that table are exactly what they should be. But for me, it was the justification itself that I didn't agree with. And it was the idea that all properties be treated equally. So for me, I guess I feel like if there is a property that is densely forested, that should not be treated equally as an unforested piece of property, right? I feel like there should be a way for us to give extra attention and extra value to a piece of property like that, and try to steer development away from those properties to the ample other lots that are available in Shoreline. So that's the one area that I would like to see us revisit, try to figure out if there's a way that we could address that. I don't exactly know how, but the value to our canopy, the value to our environment, I think it amplifies and multiplies in these areas where trees are densely packed together. And I'd like to see us give that a little bit more attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilmember Mork.
Thank you, Mayor. I too would like to echo the Deputy Mayor's comments. I am so happy to live in a city where people care so much about our environment and about climate change and what to do. And the time they put in this is really impressive, and it makes me proud to be from Shoreline. There is a couple of things that as a general statement, you know, the tree canopy, one of the things that I'm interested in staff giving us information on is how frequently the tree canopy is done, so that we understand how many trees are coming down. I think that's really important. Some of our commenters talked about incentives and enforcement. And I really think that those are things that are not adequately addressed in this match of amendments and do need to be considered in the future, but I will leave that there. The one question I had on C10, the tree protection standards, I'm not clear on what the time frame is. So what is the duration of the permit that this additional irrigation water would be required to be provided? Is that the couple of years of construction, or is that you know, some different time frame?
So typically through the permitting process, we'd require a 3-year period where we would inspect it after the 3 years to make sure that what was replaced is living. So at least that long.
Is what happens if it's not living?
Then we have the bond in place to replace it and try again.
Is that sufficient incentive for developers to want to keep things living? Is the amount of money involved sufficient?
In my experience, it has been.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Other questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor. When this comes back to us, or at the time this comes back to us, I would like an amendment to change the diameter or breast height for significance trees from what it is currently to 6 inches as discussed. Well, I mean, I know it was recommended denial by the Planning Commission, but I would like to see that come back as an amendment before the council.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank
I mean,
you.
I'll say, but I mean, I think I'll say that, largely say that I appreciate the work of the community coming together on these amendments, the work of the Planning Commission. And I think that I think this shows the value of the Planning Commission and the work that they do and the hard work that they do to balance all competing interests in the city. And so I just want to see this one come back to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ramsdale.
Thank you, Mayor Scully. I just want to reiterate what Deputy Mayor Robertson and Councilmember Robertson and Councilmember Mork mentioned about how impressive the work that went into putting together these amendments. I had one question regarding it was raised by Mr. Fosmore during the public speaking section of our meeting this evening, and he mentioned that item L was not presented in the council presentation that related to penalties, and I'm kind of wondering if Mr. Zafran can speak to that.
Yeah, that was proposed to the Planning Commission. They did not recommend that be part of the amendment, so it was not included as part of their recommendation and not forwarded to the council as part of that amendment.
So I'm a little confused. Does that mean that the do those fines still in place if the amendments are approved the way they're written to the council?
No, it would not be. The fines in that section would not be approved. They would have to be proposed to council to be put to vote it on. So put that back into the amendment language, and then the council could vote to put those back in.
What was the rationale for taking those fees out of the amendment?
So there's other avenues the city has to enforce, to impose penalties on someone who doesn't follow the permits. And staff really thought there would be a conflict with the new language, with the processes we already have to perhaps find somebody who's not complying with permit conditions. So really we thought there could be conflict, and really wanted, and there could be some more conflicts throughout the code that staff would have to study more closely, but we just didn't want to prove something that would be less than what we could already do now through other avenues.
Okay, so when you said that there are ways to enforce those, there's other ways to enforce the policies. Are those enforcement tools monetary, or are they some other form?
No, they're monetary penalties through the code enforcement provisions. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to know what those penalties are, how they compare to what Mr. Fosmore suggested.
Great.
The other thing that I just a comment, and I mean, I just really I learned so much by reading the emails that came in from residents and listening to the voicemails that came into my voicemail. And one of the things that I felt was kind of missing, or one thing that I'm kind of concerned about, is that we are in a crisis, a climate crisis, and that we know that the most effective way to kind of reduce our net carbon footprint is to increase density in transit corridors, reduce barriers to access to public transportation. One concern I have is that some of these amendments may create barriers to accessing public transportation and facilitate increased density on transit corridors. So I'm kind of wondering if staff has a kind of an opinion about whether some of these amendments may hamper some of those proposed developments. For example, like the pedestrian bridge across I-5, would these, by changing some of these tree codes, would that create a barrier for that project to be completed?
Staff believes what Planning Commission has recommended through these development code amendments are really kind of strengthening is what we already have. It's nothing that would, be a detriment to, we believe, development in our 2 light rail station areas. They're really more strengthening what we have and clarifying kind of what we already do now.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from council? Councilmember Mork.
I'm sorry, I wanted to let everybody else talk first. I don't know how it works on the urban forestry idea. I think that's a great idea. I understand it's not part of a comp amendment, but my hope is that sometime the council can discuss having a group to talk to our residents about urban forestry, about stormwater, about other sustainability issues. And don't want to belabor the point tonight, just other than say it's a good idea.
Thank you. And actually, Mr. Saffron, I'd like to follow up on one of Councilmember Rangel's questions. Which sections of which zoning designations or comp plan designations do these amendments apply to?
Well, unless they're specifically called out, and there's a couple of amendments that specifically call out zones, the multifamily and MUR zones, it would apply citywide.
Well, but the tree code doesn't apply to MUR 70, right? I mean, we specifically exempted that from it.
Commercial zones, MUR 70,
yeah,
correct.
Right. So these amendments don't apply to the stuff in those zones at all, right?
That's correct.
Right. Thank you.
That's
Councilmember, thank you. Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you. One additional question. Can you walk us through a little bit more in more detail the amendment that would, the staff initiated amendment to allow the director to waive the retention percentage?
Yeah, so currently the director can reduce the amount of trees that are retained. There have been circumstances where a property has a single family home has one significant tree. That tree has caused foundation and utility issues. The property owner wants to remove the only remaining tree, and really the director doesn't have the authority to approve that, even though it's causing kind of property damage to a home. So that's kind of where the amendment came from.
Did the planning commission, one of the things I would like to see is sort of a report of how often the director would, or something in the code that would require a report to the council on when waivers happen. I think one of the questions here is, if you waive the tree, I mean, in the case of the example you described, then you could go from one significant, there's no requirement. If you waive something, then there's no requirement to replace. So in this case of the one significant tree that's causing damage to the foundation, etc., I mean, I can understand that, but there's no, if you waive it entirely, there's no requirement for a replacement. So help me, can you help me here?
Yeah, I mean, for the director to actually approve that, there is criteria that the property owner would have to meet to do that. First of all, there'd have to be a good justification to do that. But there's also, in that same section, it does say if that exemption is granted, then there's still subject to the tree replacement requirements for that tree. So it's on in the staff report on page 15, number 3. So
it's not on the code being amended, but there is, if the waiver does occur, there still is requirements for fee in lieu or
tree replacement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I have 2 cents I'd like to add, and then we'll go back to any additional questions. I generally support the staff and planning commission recommendation. My concern is on exactly that one and the one that follows, C8 and C9. This waiver, looking at C8, the waiver is not limited to trees that are impacting a foundation. I mean, this is a broad brush waiver that lets the director basically get rid of the entirety, falling into very broad categories. It talks about to facilitate several other priorities, such as preservation of a greater number of smaller trees, landmark trees, recommendations by a certified arborist, perimeter buffers, or threats to reasonable use of property. So we have a reasonable use statute already. So we can't have a situation where we say you must preserve the trees and therefore you can't build anything on it. And adding a layer on top of that is unnecessary. And what it does is it gives authority to just sort of decide without reference to any of the standards we establish when this code should be applied or when it shouldn't. And my suspicion in response to Councilmember Roberts' concern is that this happens all the time. The one we had today had a reduction in the number of significant tree preservation. There was a certain number required, I think it was 167, and it was reduced by a small amount. And there may have been a great reason for that, or there may not have been. We don't know why, and we as a council aren't gonna see most of these reductions. And even the ones we do see, we generally don't micromanage like that. So I never want to give staff unbridled discretion to just waive things. If it's going to be given, I think it really needs to be narrowly constrained. So I will not be voting in favor of amendment C8. And likewise, C9, it goes the other way with it, right? I mean, it requires, it doesn't allow waiver. It would require either replacement trees or a fee in lieu. And that's what I'm hoping happens. With the reasonable use statute, I'm just not seeing a reasonable number of scenarios where you've got a tree growing into a foundation that can't be removed. That sounds like a hypothetical, not a real concern to me. And if that hypothetical concern is a real concern, then let's come back with a narrowly tailored waiver that talks specifically about situations like that, where you've got a risk to an existing structure, right? Not just I can't build a big enough house, but a risk to something that's already existing. So with those concerns, I echo everything other council members have said about the community input and the thought that went into this. I do want to also address the concern that was raised about one of the public commenters toward the end about inadequate public comment on this proposal and how one group of citizens sort of took it over. That's how this process works, right? I mean, we have citizen proposed amendments. We then have a series of hearings before planning commission and before council where everyone can weigh in. This, as far as I'm concerned, is exactly how a citizen initiated amendment should have gone. And I'm proud of the folks who participated. I'm proud of the folks who spoke against it. And I think we have given every opportunity to consider what the public has to say before we make a final decision on it. And generally speaking, I agree with other council members in the planning commission that most of these are a great idea and will improve our existing tree protections. Other questions from council? I don't think we've heard from quite everybody, although we don't need to on this one. All right, seeing no other questions, can you remind us of the next steps, Mr. Zafran?
You will be hearing through this batch. There's also a batch of SEPA amendments and then kind of a miscellaneous, and you'll hear that on March 7th. And then and all of the amendments will come back to you on March 21st for action. So we'll have sounds like we'll have some amendatory motions as part of that staff report for March 21st.
All right, thank you very much. Any additional comments or questions from council? Seeing none, that concludes this item.